Session. We have a number of very interesting panelists ahead of us. I would like to welcome you to the closing session. Thank you all for attending the last 5 days of what's been a really innovative and exciting conference. A call to action, which is very appropriate given the timing. However, I think the timing of our conference is typical. There's always going to be a call to action around this time of year. Our first speaker I would like to introduce was instrumental in helping with the success of this conference. Aaron Cohen is the director of the Johnson Space Center in Houston. He was appointed to the directorship in 1986. His primary management responsibilities include advancing U.S. capabilities in space through the development of the shuttle system as well as the space station program. He also is responsible for selecting and training flight crews of the NASA manned spaceflight program. So any of you who are interested in that, we can talk to Aaron Cohen. I haven't yet figured out what my angle will be in space as an association manager, but we'll see as time goes on. Mr. Cohen came to the Manned Spacecraft Center, now the Johnson Space Center, in 1962 during the Apollo spacecraft program. And from 1969 to 1972, he was the manager of the Command and Service Modules Apollo spacecraft program. And from 72 to 82, the manager of the Space Shuttle Orbiter project. His NASA awards are many, including the Exceptional Service Medals, Outstanding Leadership Medals, Distinguished Service Medals, Certificate of Commendation, and Engineer of the Year Award in 1982. He received the Johnson Space Center Special Achievement Awards in 1976 and in 1978. He's authored many articles in scientific technical journals and publications. We've asked him to make some closing remarks for our conference. It's appropriate that he do so. We're honored to have with us a native Texan who helped support our conference tremendously. Please help me welcome Mr. Aaron Cohen.
Thank you, Lauri. Thank you very much. I'm extremely pleased to be here and share with you some perspectives I have on space exploration. As we look around us today and read the newspapers, old barriers are falling, old alliances are changing, the planet leaders are speaking of a new world with hope and optimism for the future. And it's entirely fitting that as we look ahead in the 21st century, the theme for this conference is space, a call to action. This, ladies and gentlemen, is certainly what I say is the time for some action. Space flight is not an unaffordable series of stunts on a vast sea, as some would describe it. Rather, space flight is also an ideal, a statement by humans for humans, an expression of purpose, and an eloquent tribute to our belief in a better future. We are at a crossroads now, at an important juncture. It might be helpful to look back on the path we've traveled before moving on. In terms of U.S. aviation policy, which led to space policy in time, the trail begins in 1915. That was the year that Congress created the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the agency that gave birth to NASA. The bill that created the NACA was obscure. The initial outlay of $5,000 was paltry, and the goal of the legislation was Olympian, directing the new agency to supervise and direct the study of the problems of flight with a view to their practical solution. I was recently asked to deliver some remarks at a dinner marking the 50th anniversary of the Laboratory for Information and Decision Systems, the old Servo Lab, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. When they invited me to speak, the lab's directors asked that I outline NASA's plans for the future exploration of space. And he said, predicting the future, the letter noted, is always hazardous, but we may well be able to invent it. My theme today is to view both the past and the future along the 75-year timeline. I would ask you to consider that in 1915, when NACA was born and the science of flight was in its infancy, the United States had virtually no aeronautical engineers. There were no wind tunnels, no test pilots, no real science of flight, only trial and error for the most part. The NACA's first wind tunnel was dedicated at Langley in 1920. Wind tunnel number 1 was built largely of wood, had no return circuit, used a 200 horsepower electric motor to drive a wind propeller that could generate air speeds high as 90 miles per hour, which is Mach 0.1. Many other tunnels developed, and one by one they attacked each of the regimes of flight. And by the 1970s, we had arrived at a state of sufficient expertise and confidence to go off and build a winged vehicle capable of flying at Mach 25. In looking to the future, if we are to make anything at all that is past, it is that our wildest imaginings probably will do little justice to the world 75 years hence, to the wonders of the year 2066. Charlie, the first and easiest prediction to make about the year 2066 is that the National Space Society's 85th Annual Space Development Conference, held at the Tharsis High Regency on Mars, will be a great success with good speakers and a wonderful turnout. And some poor soul, no doubt, will attempt to sum things up and look back on the past and then predict what the world of 2140 will be like. What will he find as he looks back on the 1990s? And what will it mean for his day and time, for his sense of the future? Will he see the beginnings in the 90s of the trends and developments that helped shape his world? We can only guess. But it does seem likely that 75 years from now, historians will recognize that space exploration stood at a crossroads in the early 1990s. Today, we face a number of pivotal choices, and what we choose to do in space and how we choose to do it will dramatically influence our descendants who read and think in the year 2066. In 1989, President Bush proposed a long-range space exploration initiative and set a goal for the United States for a space station in the 1990s, returning to the moon at this time to stay, embarking on expeditions to Mars. What the President did, plain and simple, was propose that we move a small piece of our society off-planet. Just think about that. If we are serious about returning to the moon to set up permanent scientific facilities there, we will have to be able to routinely place approximately 500,000 pounds worth of equipment and provisions and propulsion in low Earth orbit. We will have to be able to boost that up out of the Earth's gravity well and then get it to the moon. That's 500,000 pounds. Some of you will remember that history's two largest boosters at this point, U.S. Saturn V and the Soviet Energia rocket, have achieved a capability of approximately 200,000 pounds, a little more, a little less, to low Earth orbit. A second sobering number came when we looked at the scenarios for getting to Mars. For each expedition, we are talking about approximately a little less, a little more than 2 million pounds of equipment, provisions, and propellant in low Earth orbit before we can even start the journey to Mars. Some of you here may have heard of Wernher von Braun's plans for a super rocket called Nova. It would have dwarfed the Saturn V, and the Nova would have been able to loft 1 million pounds to low Earth orbit, half of what we need to get a team of explorers to Mars. Many of the other critical variables we face today grow out of these hard requirements, and each option we choose will have its own ripple effect downstream in the 21st century. Consider some of the choices we face. In sizing the launch vehicles we're about to build, we must first decide between in-space assembly and direct transport of inhabitants to the surface of the moon and Mars. We have to choose between chemical, electrical, nuclear, or other forms of propulsion. We have to make a decision whether these missions will evolve over time or take the form of full-blown expeditions. Do we have the capability to build closed-loop life support systems? Should we try to perfect artificial gravity for our Mars vehicles or invest in physiological studies so that humans can thrive in zero-G for 2 or 3 years? All of these considerations and many more are the kinds of things which make it difficult to predict the future. But we can say that 75 years from now, our friend will read in his 1991 almanac that space exploration and investment in the future, his future, were dangerously threatened in Congress by the budgetary crisis of the time. To the people of 2066, this will seem as short-sighted in the extreme, but then as now, of course, hindsight will be 2020, as the latest electronic dispatch from the New York Times will attest. Our future friend will see that a meticulous Phase 1 mapping of the surface of Venus was completed that year, that a sophisticated machine called the Gamma Ray Observatory was sent aloft to join a kindred craft, the Hubble Space Telescope, in exploring the mysteries of the universe. He will see that the space shuttle created in its 10th year of operation in 1991, even as it was being harshly criticized by those who couldn't see the trail ahead or the trail behind, for that matter. Then he will look at the appendix of his book and find at the time this versatile research craft, which accounted for only 4% of all the U.S. launches to that point, had delivered more than 40% of all the U.S. mass to space. The tone of those times may be difficult for him to fathom as he reads of how Americans grapple with the costs and the challenges of becoming a spacefaring nation. Perhaps the debates will seem somehow misty and nostalgic in the year 2066, just as biplanes and barnstorming seem to us today. Perhaps he will explain the furor to his listeners as the natural result of a world in the headlong transition of a nation moving out of its past and coming to grips with its future. And then perhaps it will all make sense. He can remind them that technological development and the advance of science have always spawned controversy and comment. He can help them understand how plans and projects grew out of the times and how each new step prompted another. He'll tell them how space station freedom, once Congress came to its realization how important it was finally in orbit and operating, and became the benchmark for more advanced efforts. He'll describe how the closed ecology biosphere developed for spaceflight provided technology that in his time is being used to render the Earth less vulnerable to the ravages of pollution and environmental catastrophe. He will explain just how daunting the prospects of Mars exploration seemed to the world in the days before the computer keyboard was replaced by voice command systems, before artificial intelligence and robotics and 100 other technologies ushered in the era of the 24-hour work week, before helium-3 was mined on the moon to fuel the fusion reactors on Earth. His audience, many of them who will still be thinking of the just-completed Martian glider route over Tharsis, will no doubt find some amusement as he recounts the space debates in the 90s. But will they understand? And who knows? A lesson we have learned this century is that unless some sort of fundamental sea change occurs, there never will be large clusters of concerned citizens standing at the ramparts demanding increases in funding for basic research and development. The corollary to this, of course, is that there never will be enough money available to finance all of the exciting projects we can identify or pursue if given the time and the freedom. And finally, given the seeming inevitability of this, all of us here can take a measure of comfort in that science becomes an art when it pushes on despite these truths of modern life. But that is the way it has always been, and perhaps always will be meant to be. I believe we may well be able to invent the future. In fact, if you look around and soak up some of the lore of where the space enterprise stands in 1991, we've already begun to create tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Although we like to deal in reality too, we're trying to be that group of people who's supporting that basic research, and we'd like to, with your help, grow even larger so that reality will be changed. For our next speaker, we're very lucky to have General Robert Harris, who's U.S. Air Force retired. He's currently the president of the Property and Casualty Division of the United Services Automobile Association. He has recently retired from 36 years of active military service after serving his last 3 years of his career as Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was appointed as the first officer to serve in that position by President Ronald Reagan in 1987. And prior to assuming that position, General Harris was the Commander-in-Chief of North American Aerospace Defense Command and the first Commander-in-Chief of the United States Space Command. Last summer, when there were problems at NASA and with the space program generally, the President of the United States appointed the Committee on the Future of the U.S. Space Program, which has recently and continues to be called the Odyssey Committee. This committee is still in effect. General Robert Harris is a member of the Odyssey Committee. We're very proud to have him come speak to us about the horizon for progress of our national space agenda.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this morning and have a chance to chat with you a little bit about what we in the Augustine Commission saw as the National Space Agenda, or our Horizon for Progress. I understand that Joe Allen was with you earlier in your meetings, but he only touched on the commission or the committee and its work. So my intent is to go into a little more detail and maybe throw in a few personal observations as I go along. The report, if any of you haven't seen it, is, I think, pretty well written. I'll tell you why here in a minute. I've been on a number of different committees and groups, and you usually have a pretty good-sized staff that helps you put things together, takes a lot of notes, and you get people assigned to work different areas for you and so forth. And we had a very competent individual from NASA to help coordinate things for us, but we didn't have any note takers, and we didn't have any script writers or draft writers. It came time to write the report. We sat down one Sunday morning and all rolled up our sleeves and got up in front of an electric blackboard and started writing the outline and dividing up parts of it and going on home to write the report. This was noted, I found out later by others. Lou Branscombe in particular, I guess, noted that when he was testifying before Congress, that it was a little unusual to do a report that way, and I was pleased to know that our labor of love and our blood, sweat, and tears did not go unappreciated. So the words in this report are the words of the members of the committee, not of some staff. And for those of you who are really interested in how we saw the problems that the space program has experienced over the recent years and how we saw them in contrast to the successes of the Apollo years and earlier, and how we think all that should be translated into an agenda for the future when coupled with our current capabilities and how we saw them. All that is in this report. It's not a very long report considering the breadth of what we were trying to cover. As about a 9-page executive summary. But to get the recommendations themselves and what we really thought needs to be done, the agenda, so to speak, you have to look at the report itself, and we designed it that way. We didn't want to write a report that people would ride off into the sunset with the executive agenda in their hands and think that they had it all. These should be available through the government printing office. I hope they still are. Hopefully we printed enough, and if that wasn't enough, that they were responsible. But I'm not up to date on what the status of that is. The report produced a national agenda or national space program with 5 elements. It recommends a program with 5 elements. really, if you, depending on how you look at it, there really is a sixth, but we advertised 5 elements. Science, mission to planet Earth, mission from planet Earth, which is another term for, catchy term for exploration of the universe. Our technology base is the 4th element, and the 5th element is our space infrastructure, primarily the transportation infrastructure. And then we had some comments on management. These were, we did not want to make these a big foot stomper in the report because we wanted to make sure that Dick truly had plenty of flexibility to organize NASA and point it in the direction that he thought appropriate on the basis of our substantive recommendations that we should not be telling how to organize. But we did think it would be useful to have to produce some suggestions that might be helpful as we saw after having taken a good hard look at the organization for some months. Now, there obviously was a big question and problem of priorities. Should we prioritize those 5 elements? Should we say that one is more important than the other? And we had a lot of discussion on this point, and all shared the concern that when one does prioritize and list elements such as those and put a number beside each one of them, there's a great temptation for people to ignore the importance of the 4th or the 5th. We picked these 5 elements. There could have been other elements. There could have been other things that could have been building blocks for our space program or components of the national agenda. All 5 are important, and we tried to stress the importance of a balanced program. And although we did say that scientific endeavors should command the highest priority for our resources, that science should be the #1 priority of our efforts, we tried to stress the importance of a balanced program because the 5th thing we had on our list was transportation infrastructure, and you're not going to do much in space, scientific, or anything else if you don't have the transportation infrastructure. It was the rocket engines and the boosters that got us to space in the first place, and they are so fundamental that there's a tendency to take them for granted now. This is a long way of saying that the last dollar you spend on the first priority item is not necessarily, in fact, it definitely in this case, is not more important than the first dollar you spend on the 5th item on your list or the 4th item on your list. So there has to be good balance with recognition that at the outset, the whole purpose of trying to move ahead in space is the advancement of scientific knowledge. Now, we didn't elaborate a whole lot on what we meant by science. If we had, we'd probably produced a report as large as a telephone book. That's very difficult because I'm sure that if we asked everyone in this room to write down on a piece of paper, how would you define space science or scientific endeavors in space and so on, you'd probably come up with as many answers as there are people in this room. But basically what we had in mind was that about 20% of the resources that NASA devotes to the space effort should be prioritized and established by the scientific community. There's always a great deal of competition for the dollars and the room on the spacecraft or the boosters, the case may be, whatever the issue might be. And in that process, while there are many things one must do, we felt that scientific endeavors should command the highest priority in a balanced way. Now, the facts are that in the past, that's about what NASA has devoted to space science, for scientific activities in space. And I always hate to use the term space science because, again, that means different things to different people, probably quite different. But we're really talking in a broad context of scientific endeavors. Now, the other problem
with the emphasis on science is that if properly done and intelligently done, there's a large scientific ingredient in all of the other 4 elements of the agenda that we outlined. The mission to planet Earth is largely a scientific endeavor to find out more about our planet, to understand the atmosphere and the influences on the atmosphere, the interaction of different elements of our environment and so on. Try to take simultaneous measurements, which we haven't done before, in certain columns of the atmosphere, to get a much more comprehensive picture of the relationships, the different parameters by which we can measure the activity and performance of our atmosphere. And I just use atmosphere and environment as one example of the many things involved in the mission to planet Earth effort and the kinds of experiments that are envisioned. Many of you know much more about that than I. I simply want to stress that there's a large scientific content in that effort, which would be apart from the kinds of things that I talked about earlier. Similarly, in the mission to planet Earth endeavor, there's a large scientific content. I said mission to planet Earth, I meant mission from planet Earth and the exploration of the universe. After all, we're really interested in the universe in order to advance our scientific understanding of the universe and better understand the planets, how they were formed, and what they consist of, what their life cycles might have been, and what they might be in the future. So that's about all I have to say about the scientific effort, but I want to stress that we did clearly state in the report that it should be our number one priority. Now, mission to planet Earth, I think I've touched on, but I'd like to point out one other thing. We did have some concern, expressed some concern, that in the pursuit of that program, there might be a tendency to, in the interest of economy and in response to other pressures, to move toward very large and complicated spacecraft. That the dependence on the program on a single large spacecraft that would take a great many measurements, but if it fails would set the program back dramatically, that such dependence should be looked at very carefully. We did not want to, in any case, in any of these elements of our agenda, we did not want to try to design programs or recommend specific changes to programs. We simply wanted to point out where caution should be exercised in our concerns for certain trends and potential manifestation of certain kinds of problems. We felt that where experiments and measurements in the mission to planet Earth effort could be separated and interdependence could be contrived without a total loss in data collection capability if a failure of one element of the system were to take place. We felt that was a good way to go. However, there is the problem of balancing cost against all of what I just said, because there are economies of scale involved in building large spacecraft. One bus can service a great many sensors and assist in the conduct of a great many different experiments. And then, of course, there is the need for some specific kinds of simultaneous measurements of scientific nature, of course, and from the same location in space, in which case there is going to be a need for some fairly complicated spacecraft design. We simply urge caution, but again, I would like to return to priorities. We felt that the mission to planet Earth is a very, very high priority effort. In fact, we listed it second as our second most important endeavor or element of the National Space Program. Third element is the mission from planet Earth. There's a lot to say here. I don't want to get into too much detail because there is so much to talk about. we're mainly talking about as far as what we can see on the horizon today is concerned. Return mission to the moon, exploration of the moon, and preparations for a Mars expedition at some point in the future. We felt that it is too soon to establish a target date for a Mars expedition. There are a great many uncertainties. The one that concerned me and several other members of the committee the most is the uncertainties surrounding life sciences and the things that we have yet to learn about the extended manned operation in zero-G environment. We are just now, over the recent months since the opening of a dialogue with the Soviets, learning more about what they've learned in their much more extensive long-term, long-duration flight experience. And there are some very sobering realities there. There is much yet to be known before, in my opinion, before we could think about setting a date for when we should go to Mars. How much zero-G environment how long man can experience a zero-G environment and still be functional and effective in an exploration mission is a question that, as far as I'm concerned, and several other members of the committee are concerned, is unanswered. The key to finding out the answers to the questions involved in life science research is the space station. And we strongly urge that the space station be refocused with its primary mission and basically the sole justification for its for an investment in it. It should be the investigation of the unknowns surrounding life sciences, particularly the zero-G environment. There are other uncertainties as well. Now, that doesn't mean that other experiments couldn't be developed and conducted on a space station, but we knew of none that by itself, including the potential for microgravity research, we knew of none that by itself would justify the expense of a space station. But the life sciences work, if we are to pursue manned exploration of the universe in the future, is absolutely vital. And as far as I'm concerned, we might as well write off any ambitions we have for future manned exploration of the universe if we're not willing to pursue the space station vigorously and conduct meaningful experiments that are well-focused and well-oriented toward the very challenging missions that lie ahead. There's a tendency to oversimplify a mission to Mars and think of it as just one great big lunar expedition, a little bit longer, a little bit further away, but we've done it before and we can do it again. And it's just not that simple. This is going to be a tough mission. The third is another element of the mission from planet Earth that I personally think is important, and other members of the committee agreed with me, but perhaps not with quite the same enthusiasm that which I held this view, and that is that I think it's important to go back to the moon for its own sake, whether we plan to go to Mars or not. I think it's important to go back to the moon. There is a lot of important geological work that can be done. We will understand our universe much better. The moon has not been spoiled or damaged by an atmosphere. And so on the surface of the moon, we can find out a lot of things about various elements of our universe, the Earth in particular. And we can also find a lot by doing geological work. Further, without an atmosphere, it is an ideal station upon which to build astronomical observatories. we can get good separation from observing stations, far better and far simpler to tend and to position and so forth than we could if we tried to do the same kind of work with spacecraft. We can get many orders of magnitude better definition in astronomical observations from a moon-based station than we can from a perfectly performing Hubble telescope. I use that just as one example. Furthermore, I think there are a great many unknowns out there, things that we don't even know that we don't know, that we will find out and learn about if we go to the moon and try to set up a semi-permanent, it would be a permanent colony that would be manned most of the time, not necessarily all of the time. Those are things that have to be worked out. Now, General Tom Stafford is heading a synthesis group, which I assume all of you know about. And the role that the moon can and should play in further exploration beyond the moon, i.e. Mars, but not necessarily limited to that, of course, will probably be revealed when his report is published. As far as I know, it has not yet been published, I don't think. Is that right, Aaron? That's something I would urge, and you probably all don't need my encouragement, but that I think is going to be the next significant step in planning for the future, is to take the work that's been going on for a long time under Tom Stafford's supervision and take a good hard look at that and see what that means. It will also tell us a lot about the kinds of planning we need to do, technology that needs to be developed, what kind of technology base needs to be honed to prepare us for the future. Very, very important effort, and its report should be a signal document in the history of our space effort. Which leads me to the next point, and that is the technology base. This is a subject worthy of great elaboration and a talk all by itself, so I can't afford to take the time to dwell on it in any length, but we need to, the technology we're using and employing in our space endeavors today is technology that is many years old. We have not had enough money. Of course, I don't need to tell this group that the funding for space efforts dropped dramatically after the mid-60s and the Apollo effort, and almost always the first thing to go when you start feeding programs hand to mouth is the investment in the technology base. We experienced this in the Department of Defense. I saw it year after year, but we did have a large enough budget in the Department of Defense with a large enough threat that we could bleed off a certain percentage of all of our effort for such things as independent research and development and other technology-based efforts. We even can sustain the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, to be the watchdog of technology-based. There's a lot of argument about how well all that worked, but the evidence of recent months suggests that it certainly wasn't a failure. I think we really have problems. All of the committee felt that we have very serious problems in the space effort. We've got to rebuild our technology base. We have capacity to do that in this country, but other nations of the world, French, Japanese, and others, will be ahead of us in the technology before long, and in some areas may already be. Certainly the Japanese are demonstrating in a lot of ways that they're ahead of us in building quality into their products. We have just got to get back to the business of sustaining a strong technology base. And propulsion is one of the most important areas. There are some who would even suggest that in the interests of current performance, that we may retard the advancement of technology by insisting on using proven technology and emasculating the drive and the incentive behind innovation and creative new solutions to problems. Industry is not going to be incentivized to develop new technology to meet the problems of the next generation of spacecraft if what we're interested in buying are spacecraft with proven technology in those spacecraft. Well, the last item is the space transportation. We put it last, I suppose, because it is so obvious that it is so important that none of the other four things one might want to do matter if you don't have a good, solid foundation for space transportation, a good infrastructure. And one of the most controversial aspects of our space program before the committee met, and one that we knew we would have to deal with and address head on, was the role of the space shuttle. Aaron has discussed that some. The space shuttle is an absolutely magnificent machine. I think the achievement embodied in the space shuttle is not nearly as well appreciated by the people of this nation and the world as it should be. The shuttle has really enabled us to do some very dramatic things in space. But because of the limitations in funding our national space program, our civil space program, it has become the primary means of transportation to space for spacecraft experiments and people. And at one time we thought that was the right thing to do because we thought we would save so much money through its reusability, when those were the days when we thought we were going to be flying a mission every 2 weeks. We really thought that was the right thing to do. And I was a young one-star in the Pentagon when the decision was made to put all our eggs in the shuttle basket. And we began to phase down, we programmed to phase down all of our ELVs. Well, it was a mistake we all made, and we made it because times were tough and there wasn't much money to go around for these kinds of things. The atmosphere has to be, one has to be reminded of what the atmosphere was like. Nevertheless, it was a mistake. We found out it was a mistake, but that should not detract from the very elegant things that the shuttle has been able to do. No nation in the world could have built the shuttle. No nation in the world could build the shuttle today, I don't think. And I believe that the Soviets, if the rumblings we hear from some of their space people are correct, are probably going to abandon their shuttle effort. Nevertheless, we need new booster technology. We need a booster system that is based on new technology, and so we recommended very emphatically that we should get on with the building of a heavy-lift launch vehicle. We're always waiting for the right time to make the decision on the heavy-lift launch vehicle. I've been through that over and over and over again. Well, we keep kicking that can down the road, we'll never get there. We've got a space station program that is vital to future exploration of the universe, and it would, if we don't do anything, it will be totally dependent on one single launch system with limited capacity. And we need more capacity for a space station that's going to be up there for some long period of time and do eventually evolve to do lots of things for us. And the first, of course, being life sciences. So our recommendation was to continue on with the our view is that we should go on with the space station supported by the shuttle, putting the sized modules up sized as appropriate for the shuttle. Doing as much assembly and checkout as is possible on the ground, but that of course does limit the size of the modules. And then after the initial stages of the station program, after some experiments are initiated, larger modules could be added to the station with a larger boost vehicle. Further planning for lunar exploration should be based on a heavy-lift launch vehicle. The Air Force should share in the program because the Department of Defense does not have a specific need for a heavy-lift capacity. It doesn't have that specific need because spacecraft designers intentionally design spacecraft to fit the size of the boosters that are available. So it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Clearly, more capable spacecraft can be put into orbit if we have more launch capacity and if it's more reliable. So we recommended a flexible launch vehicle system using as much of today's infrastructure as is practical, but not being necessarily bound to it, so that we could evolve toward a less manpower intensive system and have a capacity, modular capacity to grow to about 150,000 pounds of payload to near-Earth orbit. Again, the emphasis on new technology. So those are our 5 recommendations, the 5 elements of our agenda as we proposed them in the Augustine report. We did make a couple of what I thought were very important organizational suggestions, which Dick truly almost immediately accepted and began incorporating. One has become controversial, and that is the establishment of an associate administrator for exploration. Now, since it has been controversial, I'd like to explain what we have in mind. It is our view that there has been too much competition between manned and unmanned exploration. And there is the view of the two camps that decisions are made by decision makers who may be captive of one camp or the other to benefit or to show that one particular type of exploration is better than another. It is our view that as much exploration as is productive should be done robotically. You can do far more for less in most cases robotically, but there are things that can be done much better with man as control of the vehicle or the system or the spacecraft, as the case may be. Now, when you think about it, many robotic missions are sort of hybrid manned-unmanned missions, and there can be a lot more of that. It's been suggested that perhaps early lunar exploration could be with man in a spacecraft orbiting Mars. I said Mars exploration, not lunar, but Mars exploration can be done with man orbiting Mars and then robotic spacecraft or robotic vehicles descend and explore the surface under constant control, closed-loop control by people in spacecraft above. There are a number of varieties of possibilities, but the point is, manned and unmanned exploration should be complementary and harmoniously blended and not competitive. And we felt that the way to do that would be to have an associate administrator who's responsible for both the robotic and the manned efforts that are oriented toward a particular mission. That his orientation should be toward the mission, and he should be organized around the mission objective, not around the means by which one would carry out that mission objective. And that is the reason. Now, there are some arguments for doing that differently, and there is the view that the administrator for space science and applications should continue to have the exploration oversight. But we felt that these things should be brought together for the reasons I've outlined. Let me conclude by telling you simply that our leadership in space is really and truly at risk. If the Congress does not support cannot find a way to support the very modest agenda that we laid out in our report, we might as well forget about being the leaders in space in 20 or 30 years. In my view, the issue on going to Mars, unlike the mindset of most congressmen, the issue on Mars is not if we should go to Mars, because man will surely go to Mars. It doesn't make any difference what anybody in this room thinks, or what anybody in the United States Congress thinks, or even the administration or this whole generation thinks. Someday, there will be man on Mars. The question is, who and when? Will it be an American? And when will it be? Now, there are a lot of other possibilities besides the two. It could be an American in the year 2020 or 2030 or what have you. There are a lot of other possibilities. But if we're not willing to do right now two essential, critical first steps toward the agenda that I described. Build a space station to do the necessary life sciences work, and build a heavy lift launch vehicle to get on to the next phases of exploration in the universe. If we're not willing to do those two things, we might as well forget the whole basket and worry about other things, turn our attention to undersea research or something else. What it would take to pursue the agenda we outlined is a 10% growth in NASA's budget until it reaches 0.4% of the gross national product. It has been of late hovering at around 2 to 0.3% of the gross national product. During the Apollo years, the peak Apollo years in the mid-60s, it was 0.8% of our nation's gross national product. So what we're suggesting is an agenda that is far more modest in terms of national resources than the Apollo program commanded. People like you have got to put the pressure on the Congress. You know, a key determinant of all this is the subcommittee on appropriations for Veterans Administration, Housing and Urban Development, and independent agencies. That committee is the key to NASA funding. I suggest to you that if we are serious about future leadership in space, we ought to have a separate committee, at least in Congress. Now, that committee has funded space programs about as well as administrations have asked for funding in the past. But times are different. And what I've seen happen this spring to both the proposal for a heavy lift launch vehicle, the administration's request for funding for the heavy lift launch vehicle and for the space station does not bode well for the future. You all have got to write letters and get all your friends to write letters. You have got to lean on people in the Congress and make them step up to the question. Do we want our nation to lead in space? And if they don't, these two programs will get funded. But if they say they do and they're not willing to support these two programs, they're talking through both sides of their mouth. Well, I hope that this gives you some good insights into how I at least felt about all of this, and I think I reflected the views of a good many members of the committee, and I commend the report to any of you who are interested in the detail. I think it presents it very well. Thanks for the opportunity to address that.
General Harris. I think we will definitely do just that. For those of you who haven't yet heard, we are in the middle of a letter writing campaign, and I will be taking back to Washington with me those letters. So I'm leaving at 3 o'clock today, so make sure you get those in. Our next speaker, Max Hunter, will pick up on a couple of these issues, which were just laid out. He was the principal designer of the Thor IRBM, which evolved into the Delta launch vehicle. He's also been credited as the father of the Strategic Defense Initiative, and he joined the staff of the National Aeronautics and Space Council in the early 1960s and has been a steadfast advocate of the space program, additionally through his previous roles as board member in the National Space Society. Last year at the closing ceremony, we heard the proposal of Robert Zubrin talking about the Mars Direct, and it inspired everyone. So this year when we looked for a closing speaker, which was talking about something that could excite this audience, we thought of Max Hunter. He's going to talk about the SSX single-stage orbit launch system, of which he is the originator, has the potential to make launch costs 100 times less expensive than they are now. I'd like to welcome Max Hunter, who's going to talk about the evolution of spaceships.
We're probably going to have some trouble with nomenclature on SSTO program. This stands for Single Stage to Orbit. It is a product of the SDIO Office, Strategic Defense Initiative Office, and contracts were let last August to 4 of the companies, and we were engaged in a typical full-blood competition. The teams of companies were headed by John Douglas, Cohen, General Dynamics, and Rockwell. And it's surprising how many people were not aware of this particular thing that was going on. The contracts were for $2.9 million apiece. The idea was, after 4 months, to select between one of 3 generic types, either vertical takeoff, vertical landing, vertical takeoff, horizontal landing, or horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing. The logo in the middle there depicts the choices of 4 companies. Boeing picked horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing. Rockwell, vertical takeoff, horizontal landing, and both McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics, vertical takeoff and vertical landing. Since then, we've been refining our designs. If some of my work here seems a little rough, it's because we are in the middle of a major competition and that takes priority. The RFP is due next Friday, 6 weeks response time. We expect it to be down to 1 contractor by September. So if I mislead any of you, I'll apologize a year from now. For all I know, you've got a friend, a father, a child, or a grandfather working for General Dynamics or Rockwell, and I don't care if I give you the wrong impression. I'll apologize later. This is known as keeping your priorities straight. Now, you'll notice I didn't mention Boeing. I don't care about Boeing. Boeing saw the light last week and withdrew from the competition. Rumor has it they just thought it was impossible to compete with the McDonnell Douglas team. So hopefully the other 2 companies will get a smart Boeing. Now, among those, there's quite a difference between the McDonnell Douglas and the General Dynamics, and these are all pictures as where we were in the middle last December. There's no way you're going to find a picture where we are now. Might show the next one. McDonnell Douglas has nicely named this the Delta Clipper. And the General Dynamics design, to the best of our knowledge, comes in base first. This, like an Atlas, or like a Gemini, or a Mercury, this comes in on its side. Without wings, pulls substantial lateral aerodynamic cross range. It reduces the re-entry G-loads. The entire vehicle is quite a soft ride. No more than 3 Gs longitudinally and more than a G1/2 laterally anywhere during flight. That makes for a good lightweight structure, and it also makes it very easy on payloads of any sort. The name Delta Clipper was given to this by the McDonnell Douglas people, and I think that's rather nice. People have often referred to trying to get to build a DC-3 of space, and of course they refer to the DC-3. And DC-3 in the airplane business means Douglas Commercial. DC in the spaceship business means Delta Clipper. And in fact, we expect during phase 2 to fly a DCX, and the orbital prototype will be a DCY, and then we will go on to the DC-1. And I will tell you later how long this may last. So, again, I'm going to give very little of the details to this. I'm not going to give you any of the details. I'd rather go back and try and set this in a little bit of a historical perspective. The term SSX stands for Spaceship Experimental. That's something that's been promoted for about 4 or 5 years now. It was only a year and a half that SDIO picked it up. I might also point out that I am a loyal member of the McDonnell Douglas team. I also am semi-retired. I have a little company of my own called Space Guild. It's not clear who I'm speaking for, but I'll tell you how you can sort it out when I say anything that's good and rational and non-controversial, and just like you would expect from a solid company like McDonnell Douglas. Then I'm speaking for McDonnell Douglas. If I get a wild look in my eyes and say something a little jazzy about the future of space that looks just a little bit wild, that's space guilt looking out from behind the curtain. This was from one of the SSX charts of several years ago. I've used several of them. And the routine eventually is fully reusable single stage. At that time, I was suggesting, and my dad picked up on it, vertical takeoff and vertical landing. You must use modern structures. Not go for massive aerodynamic cross range. You have to have some. It's kind of dumb to not have almost any. But rather than having to have thousands of miles, maybe 1,000 miles, and you can get that without wings. You can get that by a properly flown, properly contoured re-entry body. There's a lot of data on that. And it helps to keep the weight as low as you can to try to get a single stage to orbit. Also, I'll talk more about simplified checkout and the need for those sort of things. One thing which has, however, made this quite different than the work from many years ago on single stage to orbit. We are insisting that this have a continuous intact abort capability that be savable at any point during its flight, including with an engine failure. Now, airplanes are designed that way, and that's one of the reasons they're so doggone safe. And the certification procedures are very elaborate on the commercial airplanes. There has never been on this planet flown a rocket with this capability. There have been rockets that have been multi-engine and had engine failures in flight and completed their mission, but they were not savable rockets. You didn't get anything back. There never has been anything like that flown. Once you have this ability, you can now use an incremental flight test program. Your first flight will probably go a couple hundred feet in the air and over and come down. You can work up the flight envelope like airplanes. It's a different way of going about it. And this is what brings up the question of the term spaceship. We're talking something that thinks it's an airplane, that has the performance of a rocket, it has the safety features of an airplane. It is not a piece of ammunition. Now, just to give you a little feeling for how long some of these things have been around, that's a 30-year-old picture from Douglas. There was no McDonnell Douglas. That was a nuclear rocket, single stage, reusable to go to the moon and the planets. Looks strangely like an SSTO, as a matter of fact. It was. It never got anywhere because the nuclear phobia is pretty bad, and this was actually talking nuclear takeoff and that sort of thing. If you were to read that report, you would find it has almost everything in it, except one, which I'll get back to, that covers the items of the current SSTO. Its operating cost was calculated by Air Transport Association methods, very radical for the rocketeers of the day. It was redundant. It had airplane-like safety. That shows only one engine, but that was a test vehicle. It would have been multiple engines had we actually flown it. Virtually everything that is in the docket today that are considered new in the SSTO was in fact considered and documented and thoroughly looked at 30 years ago in those particular studies. You'll notice it even looks like a bit of a blunt cone, and it did not come in on its base, it came in on its side, even though we started with base reentry because there was mercury. Now, try to think. I want to talk a little bit about how good rockets can be. And this is a curve which you can find. It is the overall propulsive efficiency of pure rockets. And the reason I want to say this, there's a widespread feeling that we must get rid of rockets or we'll never have anything decent going on in space. Now, why that is true, when every ounce that's gone to space has been by rockets and not a single ounce from anything else, I have not been able to understand. But there's a widespread feeling that since rockets carry all their oxidizer in flight, they are inherently very, very inefficient, because after all, they must carry their own oxidizer. Yet if you plot the kinetic energy of the final payload and compare it to the energy that has been expended in the exhaust, you get a curve like that. It's the order to peak 64% efficient. So what's going on? The reason is very simple. There's conservation of energy. As you accelerate that oxidizer and that propellant, you put it to higher energy, and when you burn it at that higher energy, you get it back. Almost nothing. Certainly your Chevrolet doesn't have an efficiency curve like that. Rockets are, in fact, good converters of energy, converters of momentum and energy, and this is why so many of the analysis of other ways of replacing it, including air breathing, seem to never quite come out as good as rockets. There's a fundamental reason. Now, I first saw that curve about 35 years ago. We were working on some tank-killing weapons at Douglas. I had never seen it before. I never saw it taught in college. I finally found it, found the calculations in Tsiolkovsky's 1903 Russian paper on rockets. It's not a thing that has been unknown. Now, in spite of the fission, that's just a little brush at why I'm trying to talk about something very advanced as pure violence. I'm not going to talk about fancy propulsion. But there's something more crucial, and it has to do with the structures. And that curve is not mine, that curve is from the NASA Langley Research Center. And these were some studies they did on going to better and better structural weights. Now, as you go to better and better structural weights, several drastic things happen. And one is you don't care about staging anymore. There's a widespread belief that you must stage rockets. Stage rockets are always more efficient than single stage. This is simply not true. The way to look at it, you have to understand, if you had a perfect structure, what would it be? It would be zero weight. Do you care whether you throw away zero weight or not? So as the structure gets better, the ground rules and the folklore changes. And folklore that I thought was absolutely correct 30 years ago no longer applies. And you can see it there if you go down to the conventional structures on the left. There's a great difference between single stage and two stage. When you start to get good, that gets blurred. Furthermore, the question of which kind of propellants you want gets thoroughly blurred. That particular thing leads to a different way of looking at rockets. And the gist of the story I'm basically trying to tell is that good structures have made a huge change, but perceptive relook at what we thought were the fundamentals of rocketry is also involved here. We used to say, no matter how you sliced it, the only figure of merit was the launch weight to payload ratio, the gross weight. But you can make a case that that is irrelevant. So the rocket's heavy. It's the empty weight to payload ratio that is important. It's the empty weight you fabricate on the production line. You don't fabricate the gross weight. It's the empty weight you have to cost out. It's the empty weight that shows up in the operating cost calculations. The fuel weight and cost is added in separately. Once you start to looking at that and consider the gross weight to payload ratio, if it's bad, is an inconvenience, but it's only an inconvenience. It is not the thing around which all rationale should be. Then you start getting a different perspective on what you can do and what you want. Now, some of us have maintained for 30 years that someday we get this down to low price. There's always been a rationale for that, and it's the way airplanes operate. The assumption was someday we'd have magic materials, we'd solve these re-entry heating problems, and I'll tell you, the materials we have today are doggone near magic. We're getting there. And you look at the transport airplane, and you can take its propellant cost and its total cost, and this is a factor of about three times the propellant cost. If we look at the kind of vehicles I'm talking about, The SSH propellant cost is remarkably low. Also, it turns out if you look at advanced aircraft, you say, look, the air transport analogy isn't that good. There are thousands of flights a day. Take a fancy advanced airplane. Look at what it does. Nowhere near that many flights. Run about 10 times propellant cost. The propellant cost for an SST is probably about $5 a pound. This doesn't prove you can get anything. It proves you can hope and dream, and you ought to look at the problem. You shouldn't be blind looking at it. Now, to do something as radical as we're talking about, you really need to think of a different man-machine blend, we believe. We're talking about a vehicle that will operate either manned or unmanned. And you put a command module in when you want to bend. Commander is a human, the stick and rudder man is still a computer. For unmanned flights, the commander is on the ground. Now, if you have a vehicle of that sort, if you have an unmanned vehicle which can save itself, the difference in the development cost of that vehicle to make it manned, mannable, or unmanned is not at all very great if you work it out right. And if your development program has this feature of being able to save the vehicles and work up and expand the flight envelope everywhere you go. You have your choice in your early flight testing, which way you want to fly. No big deal either way. That's what it's about time we move to. If you have this device that can be saved, if you got something for the Department of Transportation to do. It should be flight certified according to the kind of capabilities it has. Flight certified like a commercial airplane, not with the so-called man rating procedures. You have a chance of getting upstream, coming up with new certification requirements, and you're talking about breaking the current culture of very expensive launch vehicles. You should all remember that airplanes and helicopters and rambles and child rated right from the start. There's nothing that magic about, quote, man rating, unquote. Now, all of this is pretty good philosophy, but it doesn't really get you a good warm feeling for what you have to do to get the cost down. And to get the cost down is very simple. You have a standing army problem. And if you're not willing to stand up and admit that, if you push that back in the corner, you're just not working the problem. You can have the most perfect propulsion in the world and the most perfect structure, and if you're going to use 9,000 or 12,000 people to launch a vehicle, it is going to be as expensive as hell forever. It's the standing army you have got to go after. Now, I referred to the fact that in arena work a long time ago, there was something that wasn't mentioned. This is what was not mentioned. In those days, 30 years ago, if you had told any of us you would ever spend the massive numbers of people we do today to check out and launch a rocket, we would have said you're absolutely out of your tree. You don't have to worry about that one. You got a lot of other things to worry about that one, but that's one you'll never have to worry about. But that is where the cost is. Now, if you take the airline operation, and that second line is pure gold. It came from something we found in the Boeing report when I was working in Lockheed. And I might have been out of Lockheed for a couple of years working on something we call the X-Rocket, which is where a lot of this SSX stuff came from. You take all the airlines and then airlines, total number of airplanes divided by people, you get 139 people per aircraft. You can look at an advanced aircraft operation, and I can't tell you what it is, but I'll tell you it's no pussycat. 8 aircraft making over about 400 flights a year. You work that up, it's only a 35-man, 385-man army, only 48 people per aircraft. I submit if anyone were to look at the kind of rocket design we're now talking about and take a look at that airplane from nose to tail, if you can't cut down that 385-man army, you're a pretty crummy engineer. But unless this problem is solved, new vehicles of any design will make no difference whatsoever. This is the problem. exception. A couple of decades ago, at this point, I would always use a curve from the Air Transport Association operating cost system. This time, I took the case of the fancy airplane. I assumed about a 400-man Army. Proper propellant cost calculation is the only good calculation there. Pretty good reuse. These were, in general, fairly rational assumptions. And you can see what you get. And this is instead of this military cost rules, that the development cost is sunk cost of this. And you can see down in the number of missions we tend to fly, you're up around a few $100s per pound if you look at the curve on the left, the axis on the left. And when you get out to where you're talking a fair amount per year, you easily drop $150 per pound. Now, just for orientation, I put on the curve on the right. No change in this calculation except I assumed I had to charge off 10,000 men to the operation instead of 400. And if I go over there to the number of maybe now only 6 shuttle flights per year, come over to the right curve and right up to $4,000 per pound, and I rest my case. This is where the cost was coming from. They'd be politically embarrassing to take a shot at it, but if you want cheap space flight, that's what you had to do. There's something I think people are not oriented to. The picture of a wonderful launch vehicle sitting on a launch pad is one of the most revolting things that a space site should ever see. They are no good to you unless they are in space doing something. Sitting there, year after year, month after month, waiting for a checkout. You have a transportation systems, flying vehicles are built to be flown, not sitting in hangars, not sitting on launch pads. The cost is horrendous. The traditional deal in the airplane business, such vehicles were called hangar queens. And I'll tell you, if you were working in a company, you had an hangar queen, you fixed that in one hell of a hurry. The thing is supposed to be in the air. You're not supposed to find it out there at the end of the launch area. And you either build them and get them out of there and have them earn their keep, or they look horrible. I don't care how wonderful they look in the painting. Now, I'll hold that for a second. I didn't realize I got that far. You put it together, Carol. Now, this does lead to the fact that you can go out to, if you believe these assumptions, these now are vehicles that are flying a lot, doing a lot of things, have extremely rapid turnaround. And in the SSTO contract, one of the things we hope to do is demonstrate very rapid turnaround very early in the program, hopefully on the first flight vehicle. It will be interesting to see how well we can do that. I think Eric's looking a little skeptical at this point. But that is the objective that we'll be trying to do. It does lead, if you buy these assumptions at all, to the possibility of massive space operations. And it leads to the possibility of doing a lot of things on orbit that we normally don't think of. And in low Earth orbit, I would like to suggest that there's one point I'd like to complain about. I think you're getting down to cost there when you can consider things that light people don't like to talk about, like tourist rides to orbit, like taking everyone to orbit, like resort hotels. Now, if you think about a resort hotel in orbit, there's very interesting things themselves. Everyone seems to feel that everyone that lives in space will live in zero G. I would like to submit that almost no one, in the grand scheme of things, who goes to space will ever live in zero G. It is too easy to make rotating configurations and give the public choice of whatever G they want, particularly with tethers. You can get a long angular rotation. The only problem is if your rotational radius is small, you get cross effect, Coriolis effects in your ear. As far as I can tell, the medics say most of those disappear in a relatively few hundred feet of rotational arm, and you can easily have a couple of miles. So why we would assume that henceforth and forevermore, space is a zero-G life, I don't understand. I think when you go to the orbital Hilton, or I guess I should say Hyatt, if you want to have a few drinks in a lunar bar, you go to the 16G level. And you'll sleep in, if you want to sleep at lower than 1G, you'll sleep at lower than 1G, or there'll be a 1G level. And sure, there'll be a zero-G theater at the center of the thing. But I think once you hack the transportation road, once you can get heavy tonnage up there and put a lot of people up there, a lot of things you can think about that may do not come out the way the normal science-oriented space program for the first 30 years oriented thought process. We've heard a lot about science today, for instance, but in the exploration of the New World, something went along for the ride. We're not all here because of a scientific drive. I've never understood why the feminists have stopped beating us up over the obvious fact that if there's anything Queen Isabella knew, she knew what to do with the Science Review Committee. Now, there are other things you can consider with, I'm talking in a class of vehicles, maybe 100 million pounds launch weight, maybe 20,000 pounds to orbit. That's the speculation here. We'll try the next thing. Let's talk about going back to the moon. Yeah. Now, this is a chart that's not 30 years old, it's 20 years old, about 23. And DTS stood for a drop tank ship. This was an early version of the shuttle. It's just about the same characteristics as the SSTO. And we got to look at sending this thing to the moon while we read it. And what this is a function of the delta V beyond Earth orbit, the number of fueling flights that you have to take fuel up to store it at the facility in orbit, so you can then refuel one of the ships and send it to the moon. And that's probably not terribly accurate these days, but it's pretty fundamental. The solar system hasn't changed much in 30 years, so it's probably a pretty accurate curve. And you'll see it takes, to go to the moon and back, the full payload, maybe 25, 30 refueling flights. Now, that sounds like a horrible thing. But I'd like to go back to the fact that if you want to lower the cost of space, you don't go by hardware, you fly the tail off of it, and you do it over and over and over again. That's where all those airplanes came from. And in this case, to interact this, to have the vehicle be able to go to the moon, all you have to do is be storing fuel in orbit. It's not the space station you need, it's the fueling station. Most of what you need out there is fuel for the care and feeding of the rockets. That's where it's at. And the next chart is a point that every time we talk about reusable vehicles in those days, somebody said, it's only useful if you have a large number of missions. Maybe you must have a large number of missions. But there's a very fundamental relation. It's not a large number of missions you want, it's a large number of flights. So you're getting used to the equipment. The number of flights you make is the number of missions times the flights per mission. So if you are putting up with small, hard-working transport rockets, if you're putting a lot of fuel in orbit, so the fuel can go and go to the moon or go to other things. That is a massive number of flights and reuses that you're asking for to make the reusable rockets make sense. So you can take that, and I took, back in those days, I took 10 of these devices. And if I were today to make a 10 SSTO calculation, it would look fairly similar to that. The operating costs there, I now have to make them a bit higher. That was ATA. Those number of flights per year per vehicle were again, commercial airplane practices, how much you can do. The requirement on the original, which we in our team expect to be, was for a 1-week turnaround in the SSTO. We think we'll do better than that. And you can plot the amount of lunar payload, the amount of Earth orbit, that's function amount of payload you put on Earth orbit. And with a good, hard-working transport system, you can have lunar and Earth orbital operations of very considerable magnitude. And of course, one of the reasons we like the vertical takeoff, vertical landing configuration, it in fact can land on the moon. And a similar chart, including throwing in planetary missions, came up again 23 years ago, something like that. Now, I pointed out that the Delta Clipper has the magic name is DC, and as I've said, we all like to refer to the DC-3 and what it did to the airplane business. You can find some pictures of them out in front there. I think that, really, I think Aaron missed a point. In 75 years, what you're going to find is DC-3s all over the moon and Mars, as well as in Earth orbit. The Delta production line has been going on for 30 years. I don't see why the Delta Clipper production line shouldn't go on for 60 years. Now again, I'd like to remind you that the basis of what I'm saying is there will be such a thing as a spaceship. It is not comes as a direct extrapolation from the current rocket work. That's in there, that's part of it. It's not really the airplane business. In fact, it won't have wings in all probability. But it will act like an airplane. It thinks like an airplane. It has a lot of it's a skillful blend of the two disciplines to make a really good space flying vehicle. And that's what I'm hoping we will get going with on the SSTO. And that's very much the ground rules and the philosophy that is surrounding the program. And so I'll throw out just one last chart. And that's my wisdom for the day. That's how you get a great spacefaring nation. You use spaceships. That's all it takes. Everything else goes along for the ride. Drafted for questions.
What's payload?
When do you think you would have one of these ready to fly?
6 years. The rate we're going into the moment, assuming the program continues to get funded, in 2 years, there should be flying a suborbital test vehicle, which will have no way near orbital Delta V, but very good at practicing fast turnarounds and all the philosophy there. The plan is to aim for an orbital prototype in 4 years after that, and operational system 2 years after that. Those are the numbers in the original RFPs.
Max, I know that you are the proponent of all this, and we're talking about low costs. What do you see as the kind of the ultimate in terms of cost per pound in orbit? And that may not be a figure of merit, but just about how low do you think we can get with this on a cost per pound in orbit?
Well, I don't know whether I want to say, because I have never presented a curve on that subject, including ones you saw, without substantial margin in it, and I'm yet looking for the guy that can find where that margin has been hit. It is difficult to assess, because when we did the original ATA work on the Rita nuclear rocket, we were trying to assess essentially that. You can't say it's zero. At a minimum, you're going to have to pay for the propellants. You use those every time. So we were trying 30 years ago to get a feel what would be the bottom. And it was hard to imagine that you could do it cheaper than airplanes do. And to get it that cheap, you had to wait for these magic heat shields that didn't have to be re-examined between flight, et cetera, et cetera. In those days, 30 years ago, the numbers we quoted at Rio were $1 a pound for the balloon thing. Now, it's not that low today. It has to do with propellant selection. Surprisingly enough, hydrocarbon propellants might make a better single-stage growth than hydrogen. And I think you can expect to drive it down in the vicinity of $15 per pound someday if you really get this thing going like that.
I just had a question. I remember the DC3. I was wondering how the DC3 was developed. Was it developed by Douglas in commercial venture? And if so, why is it not listed with commercial venture?
Okay, the question was the DC-3 was developed as a commercial venture, and why don't the aerospace companies get together and do this thing that we're waiting for the government? And I really think there's, in the first place, the DC-3, one of the things that Don Douglas Sr. always said about it in my later years, I decided he wasn't kidding. It was not planned, it just happened. And I think that's true. It was not that expensive development. It was requested by TWA after the DC-1 and DC-2 flying ice-speed. The DC-1 was requested by TWA. Part of the thing I think that we're badly missing in space, remember there was always a commercial airplane industry. You could make money flying people from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. We do not have a city located at only 2,000 feet per second $B in space. We don't have anything out there, actually. So there was always a known, understandable market. You may thought you were nuts to fly, but they were looking for in Pittsburgh. And that, I think, has been the big problem. We have to get 30,000 feet per second $B. And then we had build cities and industries and all those sorts of things, which was stupid for Columbus to ever consider. How could Isabella possibly have envisioned the Hollywood movie industry? Now that's long-range planning. So I rather think it's sort of a head over heels. And in fact, I don't think really much of long-range planning, right? I believe all progress is made not by people who make long-range plans, but by people who destroy long-range plans. Certainly works a hell of a lot more fun.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matt. We just have a couple of final closing speakers. I'd like to introduce literally the man who needs no introduction, since he's introduced just about everybody else at this conference. Charlie Walker, the president of the National Space Society.
And his stamina when it comes to both proposing and pushing again, and pushing again the ideas that are right, that are in fact going to truly get us off this world to stay, except to come back for vacations, of course. Looking forward, I'm going to be brief. From the flight deck of the National Space Society, I'm looking forward, and I see a growing National Space Society. This is not going to be easy. It never has been easy to grow an organization that promotes something that perhaps the majority of the people in a country or the people around this world don't yet fully appreciate. But we will continue to grow. We are in some difficult times now. Financially, we're a part of a recessionary economy in this country and around the world. And as a not-for-profit public membership contribution organization, we take the discretionary money that people have for movements, for activities. And in hard times, that's the first money to go. And it's happening now. We're in fact going to have a shortfall in the revenues and the money on hand to accomplish objectives and goals and fulfill obligations that we scheduled for ourselves last year. So it's tough times this year. I hope that as we attempt to satisfy the demands with the resources that are available, that we don't have to cut back in a way that you, the members of the National Space Society, see us from the outside in terms of the magazine and otherwise, but you might. And I don't say that at all easily. I don't like to say that at all. But it might have to happen that there will be some reduction in services for a time. We can keep from having that happen if we grow. If we grow in membership, and if we grow in your willingness to help us in a variety of ways with all kinds of resources. I also look forward from the flight deck to a stable funding for the space station program. As General Harris has said, as Aaron Cohen has pointed out, we really see it as the necessary next step. The step that we are beginning to take. We are feet dabbling in the waters, and we really need to proceed forward with it. Right here you see the manifestation of what is going on around us. Lauri has talked about the letters that she is going to carry back to Washington. Those letters should have been written and signed by all of you at this point in time. If they haven't yet, please put your pen to a letter and fold it and put it in her hands to go with the batch that is already going back with her and will be put personally in the hands of the members of Congress. But what's more effective, let me take this opportunity to say this, what's more effective than a letter is a nose-to-nose or even a phone call, even a short phone call. And it can be a phone call to the district office, not necessarily to Washington, D.C., and register your support. Looking forward, I also see a vigorous investment in technologies that are necessary to transport us, as Max has pointed out, and to settle us on the moon and Mars, as we have heard so many accounts of this year and in previous years. I'm looking forward, as Aaron pointed out, I really am looking forward to the 85th Interplanetary Space Development Society, or a Space Development Conference at the Tharsis Hyatt on Mars. I do have to register a need, seeing as how my 100th high school class reunion will be taking place in Bedford, Indiana, probably a month later than Memorial Day that year. I'm going to have to absolutely demand that the rapid transportation that Franklin Chang Diaz would have us have in hand with Fusion Drive be in place and operational by that time. I just have to get back to my reunion. I'm looking forward to a vigorous enterprise, commercial activity in space, as should become invigorated by the Omnibus Space Commercialization Act that will soon be introduced before the House of Representatives, the U.S. Congress. I'm looking forward to an informed world, an informed human species on this planet, as John Denver suggested, that takes preventive measures against the diminishing resources of one world and the destroyed environments of our home planet by, as he put it, building fences against the causes, not driving the ambulances in the valley to pick up the pieces. I'm looking forward to the education of our fellow crew members on this planet Earth. Education about the wonders and the challenges and the opportunities that are available to all of us by expanding our frontiers beyond this one world. And I'm looking forward to greater international understanding and partnering in the efforts to, in fact, expand the human species beyond this planet, to explore and to develop the other resources of this solar system. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all in Washington, D.C. next year. Not only you all, but your friends as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing our vision, our mutual vision of a spacefaring civilization realized tomorrow, if even sooner. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you, Charlie. Over the past 3 years now, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with this woman. She's been an inspiration to us all. She's put on an outstanding conference, and here to help us close with a few words on a call for action is Dr. Carol Lockhart Redfield.
Thanks, Lauri. And a few announcements first. My last announcements. In addition to the letters, there are postcards available at the back of the room and at the NSS table. That some things are already written already. There's some blue ones and some white ones that you can send as well with Lauri. Also, with regard to getting to the airport, Hotel Courier has made available 2 gray vans outside the hotel. It's $5 a piece to go to the airport. And they're doing about 45-minute turnaround time, so they'll be making a trip about every 45 minutes. You should check with them when the last trip left or when they expect the next one to be. And that'll be available until about 6 p.m. And the last announcement is, don't forget to purchase your audio tapes or videotapes of any of the sessions that you missed or went to and were your favorites. Jim Turney is recording those, and they're for sale outside the conference, across from the conference registration. And don't forget to pick up your T-shirts or posters for this conference, and you missed out on the buttons if you didn't get it. And I just want to say a couple of highlights of the conference and tell you how many people registered and things like that. We had 750 people register at this space development. Joe promises me we made money. Some of the best attended sessions were the nanotechnology, off-planet settlements and planetary communities. Those are the ones that I heard about. I'm sure there were some others. I thought the best event was the dinner with John Denver. All of our tours went. None of the tours were canceled. We were in the news every day, in the Express News every day, and that's the only paper that I saw, so I don't know where else we were. I knew that the Light, the other paper in San Antonio, was out here interviewing at some of the radio stations as well. And there were only a few minor changes, including our showing of Plymouth at the last minute, changing places, and we showed Plymouth to over 150 people last night. The room was full. It was wonderful. I'm curious to find out who discovered any new actions while they were here, since the theme of our conference is supposed to call for action. Who discovered new actions while they were here? I did. We have a few meetings. There's so many. Yeah?
We had a brainstorming session last night and until late hours in the morning, and we have come up with ideas for all kinds of things to be done locally and nationally to help us move ahead. So we have all kinds of action available, and feel free to pick up these. They're both here and at the back and at the NSS table.
So those are with the postcards as well next to them. Some actions that you can take. If you didn't find any yet, there's still some more to find. And I'm going to mention a few that haven't been mentioned in the places where I've been. One is to become an NSS member, or have your friends become NSS members. For Christmas, I bought my mother a subscription to NSS, and I bought my dad a subscription to NSS. Although, out of him being here this week, he might have gotten one anyway. Become a member of other space organizations. Participate in those organizations. Develop a pro-space development talk and present it to groups and schools. That's one of the things I've done over the last couple of years. I've coupled that with the work that I do in artificial intelligence, and at the end spoken about this conference. You'd be surprised. I get lots of phone calls to talk in schools. It's real easy to get to start to do that, to talk to kids and talk to groups. Get other members for other space organizations in addition to NSS. Hold a space development conference in your city, either a local space development conference, regional, or this one. And Don't forget that in your packet, Marion Dyson wrote 50 things you can do to promote space development. Take a look at that if you haven't. And lastly, again, I'll say, remember to speak your vision. You know, when all else fails and I'm resigned about what we can do and what I can do, I find that if I speak about what my vision is, I'm returned to some possibility that I might be able to make a difference in this. And my last comment is that this is the end of the conference, and it's really the beginning. We've sort of regrouped as an organization, and now the work to be done in the real conference is out there in our real lives, in the real world, in our everyday lives. So thanks for making this a very successful space development conference. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Carol. One of the most successful things about this conference was all the great volunteers we had. The head of the volunteer program, John Baccellieri, is going to come up now to lead us in our flag ceremony. This is a tradition, although it's always traditionally different.
Hopefully, traditions improve over time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. You've made the conference for each of our volunteers a special conference. As Charlie said last evening, we get better and better each year at producing the ISDC, and we do it by practicing. And we did a lot of practicing this week. However, each year it's a new challenge. It's a new group of people. It's in a new city. But each conference has the same goal. What it does is it brings us together, and we collectively are the leaders of the NSS. We're the most active members, the most dedicated. What it helps us do is recharge our batteries. So there is some tradition in having an ISDC and real value. Ultimately, we want to spread the word about creating a space-faring civilization, and the ISDC for me is very valuable. When you do come, you come from almost every state and from over 40 countries, 10 of which, or 11 of which, excuse me, are back here with active chapters. We have a shared purpose and a shared symbol, and those are our flags. And I'd like to invite Lauri Rohn up here. Lauri represents the 1992 ISDC organizing committee. Lauri, the flags are over here. Stay over here. Please accept these two flags, that of Australia and its view of the southern sky, and the state of Alaska with its view of the northern sky. And please display these proudly at the 1992 conference in Washington, where we'll all be. And thank you. Yes. In addition to the two traditional flags, this year the San Antonio chapter, and Carol in particular, donated a third flag, and this one perhaps is the most interesting for me. And I think we all want to see this view. This is called the Earth flag. It was created by Margaret Mead in 1977, and this certainly is my worldview. Finally, each speaker at this conference was asked to spice their remarks with a call for action. Some specific action that can help make us a spacefaring civilization. In the flag ceremony committee, which wasn't very many people, we decided that even the traditional, which is the flag ceremony, which you just saw, could be enhanced to further the goal of creating a spacefaring civilization. So we had two actions, and I hope we learned something from these. First, the ISDC committee here, 1991 committee, we're going to donate the flags behind me to the NASA headquarters so that Lauri Garver can take them back and display them at HQ, so that people walking through can see that we are truly an international organization. Also, we hope that we can get them to the 92 and subsequent ISDCs for display. Second, and perhaps most importantly, I'm setting a goal. When Lauri Rohn passes these to the Huntsville representative next year, we will have at least one new flag. We're going to have another chapter in another country. My chapter in North Texas will lead an effort to establish a chapter in the Soviet Union. We've had some discussions with colleagues who love it. My hope is the flag ceremony becomes a milestone where we can reach out internationally and remember our shared purpose and dedication to creating a spacefaring civilization. Thanks for coming to the conference.
Thank you, John. And finally, I'd like to again invite up Lauri Rohn, who's going to give you some welcoming remarks to Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Lauri. Next year, of course, being 1992, is kind of a landmark year, one might say, in the history of humans and what they've done in exploring their world. And what we hope to do in Washington is to take a little bit of time to look back on what we've accomplished in the last couple of years, which is actually pretty amazing stuff if you think about it for very long. And also to spend a lot of time, as Charlie said earlier, looking forward at what we hope to accomplish in the next 500 years. And we think Washington is a great city. It's got a lot to offer. And we hope that all of you will join us there. We would also like to thank Carol and Joe and Bob and John and all the people here in San Antonio who have made this such a hard act to follow, but such a great time nevertheless. And we hope to see all of you next year. And go out there and make one of your activities registering for the conference. Thank you.
Again, thank all of you for coming. We haven't gone over too late. For those of you who have to catch planes, you have your call to action now. Go home and do it. Go home.